Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Kate McCrae, Actuals Education Project Coordinator and your moderator for today's webinar. I would like to introduce our two presenters for today's webinar titled Planning a Future Meeting, New Considerations for Implementation. They are Hugh Webster, attorney at Webster, Chamberlain and Bean, and Julia Richardson, Actuals Director of Convention, Events, and Marketing. They both have over 20 years of experience in this field, Julia in meeting planning for education associations, and Hugh in advising nonprofits and associations on meeting contracts. Welcome, Julia and Hugh.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm going to start off with reviewing just various contract clauses, which are not new in and of themselves, but may be particularly important as we go forward in light of what we've been through and continuing to go through. So if we go to the next slide, please. These are the ones I'm going to touch on briefly, and as Kate said, if you have any questions, either at the end of this portion or maybe if we have time at the end of the whole thing as well. We'll talk about cancellation, force majeure, which is the big one, indemnification, audit clause, lower room rate clauses, and very briefly, legal compliance clause. So just to start off with the cancellation very briefly, I don't have a lot to say about that. I don't think cancellation clauses are going to change themselves going forward. There'll still be something in there that says if the association cancels without good reason, then there's some financial penalty associated with that. The only thing I would say is, we've always advised these things aren't, the association and the hotel, the group in the hotel aren't on equal footing with cancellation, because if the association cancels, then they pay a fee to the hotel, and the hotel gets its money, which is really what they're after. For the association, if the hotel were to cancel, even if you got some money, that doesn't necessarily make you whole. You want to have the meeting. That's part of your function, is to have this meeting. And so we usually make sure that those clauses do not allow the hotel to cancel without cause. Only the association can cancel without cause and pay some money. And I actually coincidentally saw today in the news, there's a story about a group, a nonprofit that looks like they're political, but that had a meeting set for August at a hotel in Dallas. And the hotel, and they agreed, that the group agreed to all the social distancing, and at the last minute, according to this lawsuit, the hotel said, we're canceling due to health safety risk. And so this group is actually suing the hotel, which is not the usual scenario. So that's brief comment on cancellation. Make sure it's the hotel doesn't have the right to cancel, and just by paying you handing you a check. Next slide, please. So force majeure obviously is where the action is for contracts, new contracts right now, and I think for the foreseeable future. So I want to spend most of my time on this, and I'll go through these bullets. So first of all, as you go forward, someday COVID-19 is going to be resolved, right? But disease itself is not going to be eradicated from the planet Earth. So we want to continue to have have good provisions that address disease, but make sure it's not limited to COVID. A lot of hotels we're seeing, they're proposing new force majeure provisions, and they're having the old one, the one that we've always used, right, the pre-COVID, and then they have a separate one, which is a COVID clause. Well, that's not going to cut it, because COVID's going to go away in 2022, probably, let's hope. That's not going to be relevant anymore, but there may be something else. So make sure, expand it to disease generally, whether you have it as separate disease clause or in the main force majeure, either way. Now looking at the second bullet, the usual language that is in so many contracts up until now is illegal or impossible. If the meeting is illegal or impossible, then you can get out of it, but otherwise you have to go forward. And what we've seen, what we've all learned, over the past several months is that's not adequate, certainly for disease, and that hotels take the most narrow, strict reading of what is illegal or impossible. So you want to expand that if you can. Sometimes, and you will see even now, commercially impractical or impracticable. I don't think there's any difference between those. That's a little better. It's not that much better than impossible. It means it's not physically impossible, but it's going to be really costly or tough. But it's better than nothing. If you can get inadvisable, which hotels hate, but that's a wonderful word if you can get it in there. So, but if you can expand beyond illegal and impossible, sometimes one way to look at it is try to put some objective criteria in there. So if X number of attendees, registered attendees cancel, then that's a force majeure. And that way you don't have to fight over, well, is it advisable? Is it effectively impossible? Well, 25% of our people canceled, so it is a force majeure. Or what we've tried to put in recently with some success, some not, is if the association does a survey of its likely attendees and X% say they are not going to come, that could be a trigger. And then other things, again, not tied to COVID, but public gathering restrictions. And this can get to illegality, but it can be beyond that. So if there's some sort of restriction on a cap on the number of people who can attend, but even if you're under that cap, just the mere fact that there's a cap, it doesn't send a great message to your attendees. And then you might also look at these social distancing requirements that a lot of hotels are having to implement or are choosing to implement are wonderful in terms of keeping people safe, but they may be completely impractical for your meeting. So that might be another trigger for cancellation. Next slide, please. Some words to watch out for in contract, again, particularly when hotels are proposing these new force majeure clauses. Pandemic. Disease is better than pandemic. A pandemic is a global outbreak, or half the globe. I mean, it's huge. So you could have a disease that's disruptive, but it's not technically a pandemic. So be careful of that word. CDC or State Department travel advisories. If it's a State Department travel advisory, which I've seen, that doesn't help you. They only give travel advisories for international travel by US citizens going elsewhere. That's not going to help you internally, unless you have a lot of international people coming here. But, and then also just travel advisory, CDC has different kinds of levels. So of what they say, I like travel alert, travel recommendation, something a little bit broader. And also unanticipated. Force majeure circumstances often are considered to be something that's unanticipated. Well, COVID-19 is not unanticipated anymore. And maybe communicable disease isn't unanticipated. So I'd get rid of that word if you can. So just running through these others real quickly, timing, we've learned is a huge issue. When can you declare force majeure? The hotels have said, you can't do it until, the day before your event. Well, that's not practical. What about 60 days or 90 days? And we learned that you can't wait until the last minute. If you are rebooking, and I mean, that's always a nice option if you, as a compromise, well, we can cancel, but we promise to rebook within 5 years or something. Have something in there that says, even if you could cancel because of force majeure, if you choose to hold the meeting anyway, you should not be held to attrition penalties. So if you choose out of good faith, I want to have the meeting, even though we know half the people aren't coming, we're going to have it anyway. All right. But so the hotel will make some money, but you shouldn't be stuck with attrition, which hopefully you may have negotiated down anyway. And then deposits are key. We have yet to see a hotel sue an association, although I'm sure that's coming one day. But what they are doing is they're not returning deposits that we are seeing. Obviously, it's anecdotal, but if you've paid them a deposit, they may say, well, you're going to cancel, that's fine, but we're keeping your money. So be careful how much, if you can, not pay too much in advance in deposits, but also in the force majeure, say if you do cancel due to force majeure, all deposits will be returned. So there's just a few things to keep in mind uh, as you're negotiating those force majeure. And we didn't include a sample because at this point, they're just all over the map as to how you write these. I'm sure things will shake out over the next months and years. Anyway, next slide. Let me run through. So indemnification, again, these provisions have been in hotel contracts forever. That's not going to change, but you want to be careful here. Who are you responsible for? And are you responsible for yourself and your staff? Sometimes often the hotels want to make you responsible for anything your members and attendees do. I try to push back on that. We can't control what our members do. And with disease being, maybe this won't be an issue in 2 years, but right now, if one of your members or attendees does something stupid, like shows up after they tested positive, you don't want to be responsible for that. So be careful about that. And it should be, indemnification should be based on fault. That is, you shouldn't be indemnifying the hotel just because something happened that you did. It should be something happened that you did and it was your fault. You know, it was negligent. You were irresponsible in doing it. It should be limited to third-party lawsuits. So some of these, I tell you, I'm convinced half the lawyers who write these indemnification provisions don't even know what they mean. They're so broad and vague. Make them focused. If you are sued, if the hotel is sued because we did something stupid, then okay, we'll take on that obligation. But we're not an insurance company for the hotel. We're not paying for everything that goes wrong. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about these next two real quick. There's the audit clause, and then after that is the lower rate clause. So these are circumstances where you want to make sure you get all the credit for everyone who's there, all of your attendees who are there for attrition purposes, right? And sometimes people fall through the cracks. Either the hotel didn't put them in the room block, or they signed up outside of the room block, or they didn't use the housing bureau for some reason. So the audit clause says the hotel has to compare everyone who's all of your attendees with everyone who has a room, and make sure those line up. And if there are people at the meeting at that hotel who aren't on the hotel's list, they need to be added to the list. So it's a special check that requires the hotel to do that. So I think that's important. And then the next slide, please. The lower rate clause is similar. So if an attendee can go on some travel website and get a room at this hotel, same hotel, at a lower rate, they may do that. And in so doing, they may not get into the room block. The hotel may not recognize them as one of your attendees. So this says the hotel can't charge a lower rate anywhere or allow a lower, booking.com or something. And if they do, they have to stop that. And so if you don't have a clause like this, the hotel can allow others to charge less. Sometimes hotels agree to this, sometimes they won't, but you have the audit clause to protect you on the other end. But it's worth including this, I think. Next slide, please. See what we have. Oh, so the other, sorry, I had one other before we open up for questions. The other was the legal compliance clause. I think it can be helpful to have just a boilerplate provision that says, both parties agree to abide by all applicable laws. Again, this gets back to COVID, but if there are, if there's litigation that arises out of a meeting because people got sick there, everyone's going to be fighting with everybody, and you want to be sure the hotel has followed whatever the rules are. So if the city that they're in says you have to do this, this, and this, hotels should do those things. And if they don't do those things, then it's on them. But so it's good sometimes to have that provision specifically that says hotel will follow all applicable laws. And it's usually mutual because you're happy to agree to that too. One other lesson we've learned from COVID is that contracts matter and contractual language matters and boilerplate matters. So try not to just look and say, oh, that's the legal boilerplate. That's between the lawyers. These things do, the wording does matter. So, and I would feel free to push back to the hotels. Now may be a good time to, maybe the negotiating power has shifted a little. So let's take advantage of that and push back on the hotel and say, we're not going to agree to this burdensome provision. So anyway, that's my soapbox speech.
I think that's a good soapbox, Hugh. It's really true. I think we have the upper hand right now. I'm going to launch into some logistical considerations here. Kate, if you would just go to the first one, waivers of liability. And this is something that you've heard about from some of the political events that have been held recently, where parties are, and Hugh, jump in if you'd like, are asking you to sign a release, when you come to an event, to say that if I get sick, then I'm not liable if you get sick from attending this event. And in some cases, Hugh, I've heard that, I know that most people say, yes, this is okay, sign this agreement and we're not liable. However, I've heard that in some cases that has not been the case, because a person has to prove that they actually became ill because of your event. And that's very difficult to do. Because how do we know where a person actually contracted COVID-19? So this is on the legal side, but I'm not sure how much these really hold water. If a person did sue an association, because of contracting a disease, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if you want to have these for your attendees, that's fine, and they may provide some protection, but they aren't really there. Courts won't always uphold these. Mm-hmm. And as you say, the point you're making, I think, Julie, is it really necessary? Yeah, I mean, the analogy I would make, some hotels occasionally are sued when there's Legionnaire's disease as a breakout, right? Mm-hmm. And the lawyers argue there wasn't sufficient ventilation, and that was the problem. Right. Yeah, but you can trace that Legionnaire's back to that hotel, proving that someone got COVID at your event, and also that it was your fault.
Right.
Not just that they got it, but that you, the association, did something wrong. You weren't.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's a tough. They'd have to show you weren't requiring people to social distance, and you weren't doing anything. Mm-hmm. You were really reckless.
Yeah, I'm not sure that this is necessary, but I wanted to point it out because it has been in the news, and you've heard people say, well, we're going to have you sign this waiver. Kate, the next slide, and we will discuss signage. And I know you've heard a lot about this, and it's not anything new. You just want to make sure that any signage that you have at your event, whether it's right now or later, whatever, it's very clear as to what your attendees are expected to do. Right now, we're looking at all the CDC recommendations. So, which is basically, wear a mask, physical distance, and make sure that the signage is clear and it's in all areas, at the entrances and in all the common areas. So that's pretty simple. That's nothing that is difficult to do. In the next slide, Kate. And again, temperature checks, we're seeing this. In some hotels now, they're actually doing it when people check in. And a lot of groups are doing it as they check into a room or registration or whatever. I'm not sure how long this is going to go on. As Hugh said, hopefully this is going to, once we have a vaccine, and maybe this will die down by 2022, and this won't be necessary. But right now, for any events, especially in the next year, we have to look at doing these kinds of things. Next slide. And the same thing with mask requirements. We know that some people are not averse to wearing masks, but it's to protect all of us. It's to protect me, protect you. Some states now are requiring it, so you don't, you're in violation if you don't wear one, even though in some cases an association requires that in all public areas, in meeting rooms, in the hotel, lobby areas, restaurants, whatever. So that's just a protection for everybody. And physical distancing, that again, we've heard a lot about this. It's just maintaining 6 feet of space between you and another person. And we're seeing that everywhere in departments, in department stores, grocery stores, checkouts, so it's nothing new. But what we are seeing is that in registration areas, in the exhibit halls, you're seeing floor signage to make sure that people keep a separate and safe distance from another person. And right now, this is just, it's a lot of work for the group to have to do, and it's an expense that we're going to all be incurring over the next year and possibly next 2 years, but to keep everybody safe. But this is something that we're all going to be doing. Kate, next slide. And exhibit hall requirements. This is something that is going to be affecting all of us for a while. And the new thing, and these guidelines just came out in June from from our industry leader, IAEE. And if you're not familiar with that, they give us all the guidelines for exhibit halls. And what is happening now, whether it's in a convention center or a hotel, most of these will apply. There will be 20-foot aisles. And most everybody is familiar with fire marshals. And whether you're in a hotel or you're in a convention center, there's somebody from the fire department that's going to monitor this. And you would have 2 10-foot aisles, one-way directional arrows going from one direction, going down one side, and the other coming up the other side. And I've seen this in hotel ballrooms, and it's pretty interesting. There will be 8-foot side drape between booths. And then there's going to be a lot of space above so that there's great ventilation, air ventilation. So it's, this is very interesting. And we also have seen where venues are restricting the number of people that can go into an area at one time. So for instance, there may be someone at the door who is counting the number of people who are entering a ballroom where there's an exhibit display. And when some people leave, other people can go in. The same thing is going to be true for convention center hall. And again, everybody's expected to physical distance within the hall. So these are very, very new guidelines that have come out recently, and we're all going to be experiencing this for a while. So Kate, next slide. So new meeting room sets, and this is very interesting. I have a lot of diagrams now that where with the classroom set, the tables will be 6 feet apart, and there will only be 2 chairs per table. So if it's an 8-foot table, they pretty much want you to have at least 4 feet between individuals at the table. Theater sets, they will be 6 feet apart, the chairs, and there will be 6-foot aisles between the chairs. And then of course, round tables, they will be 6 feet apart. However, there's only 4 to 6 chairs per table. Certainly it makes me a little nervous with 6 chairs per table. There's not a lot of distance there, but I'm seeing more people are going with the 4 chairs per table just for safety. Next slide. And in a registration area, boy, this is, these are very different from what we've seen before. And you will notice that even ACTFL, we're not using any paper this year. So everything is being done online. We even have built in the registration a place where a person can upload a check, or they upload their purchase orders. In most cases, we're not doing anything with paper, mainly because we want it to be more touchless and prevent that. So again, it will be 6 feet of separation between registration counters, and there will be a touchless check-in. There will be plexiglass separators between staffing and registrants. Masks will be required of all personnel. There will be a lot of self-serve counters, which ACTFL has been doing for a number of years now, but it'll be even more. Of course, badge scanning. Of course, the association will have to do cleaning protocols on all the touch screens in between. And of course, again, credit cards are preferred versus handling purchase orders and things like that, where on site, especially where people have to touch a lot of paper. Next slide. And this, I just wanted to share this with you because a lot of associations now, whether it's a virtual or a face-to-face, they're doing codes of conduct. And this is the one that I did for ACTFL for this year, and it's posted on our website. Different groups are doing different things, but this is pretty standard. And Hugh, I don't know if you want to make any comment on this, but we're finding that something like this is kind of important right now. And, I think that we wanted to just make sure that it was visible to everybody who might be interested in attending our convention.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I mean, in a sense, these codes of conduct, the risk is so much less because people aren't in person, right? So right. You don't have any of the physical issues, but you can still have bad behavior. Right. Another area we're seeing codes of conduct in a sense, so they're more business codes, is with exhibitors. Mm-hmm. And particularly if an exhibitor, let's say, if you have exhibitors that have special product demos or, things like that, they don't want their competitors to be participating in that product demo or to be disrupting their presentation, right. For a virtual trade show. So some of these codes are expanding into conduct by exhibitors as well.
I think that's a good point, Hugh. And certainly we do have our rules and regulations for the face-to-face, but you're absolutely right. And that certainly has been a concern as we've been looking at our virtual platform and going through that is, these things come up, especially in chat features. Mm-hmm. Our networking features. Are we going to have exhibitors who are going to, jump in and be critical of another exhibitor's? And those are things that I think that who knew you had to consider that until you get into working in a virtual platform and you see, wow, I mean, this could take place. But, we're all living and learning during this time. So, Kate, next slide. Okay, if there's any questions that anybody has, now is a good time, and then we'll proceed.
Sure. So there are a couple that are kind of related that we've got. One is, are temperature check devices easily attainable? And then the other is, should an association purchase and provide masks? Well,
I think it's up to the group. I think if you want to make sure that people are protected, it seems to me like that the association has to bear that cost and provide those. Some people will bring their own masks, but I think just as we've seen in other places, for instance, in the grocery store, if you come in and you don't have a mask, they have extras that, because they want to make sure, you know, people are wearing a mask. I think that's what we have to do, is to make sure we provide that. The temperature checks, I think that there are those handheld devices, and I think absolutely we're going to have to absorb some of the costs. We can't, convention centers, there are some that are providing it for entrances. They're doing temperature checks. They do it themselves. But in cases where you're in a hotel or other places that may not be providing these, I think you have to have a couple of, you know, people who are doing this at the doors, just for safety. And again, as Hugh said, who knows how long this is going to last, but, and I think there's some thoughts that maybe checking temperature is not necessarily an indicator. You know, there are people who are asymptomatic who may not have a fever. So, you know, again, those are just, I don't even know how, it's all nebulous. It's like, we don't know. And I think that it's just a consideration that we have to be careful, because we don't want to have an event where, you know, a lot of people end up sick from attending. So it's just safety precautions.
Yeah, and if I could just add on the mask question, I think you certainly, you know, would tell people to bring their own mask, and hopefully by now they are doing that. But I think you do, if you can have them there, because, and the hotel may have them as well, but a situation you don't want to find yourself in is someone doesn't have a mask, and then what do you do?
Right.
You don't want to have to kick them out, and now you get, that raises a whole nother set of issues. So
Exactly.
yeah, to protect yourself from having to deal with someone who's non-compliant, I think you might want to have them there.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks, Hugh.
Can we actually back up 1 second? I just had a question for you, Julia.
Okay.
On just because it's related to what you were talking about. What about receptions and social events in terms of, are you not having those? I mean, are they just
well,
now?
of course not in the virtual world, we're not, but
No, I mean, when you were talking about all the in the hotels.
in the meeting rooms, yeah.
Yeah.
There's nothing in anything that I've read right now where any group is having any social events. You know, they're just, you know, because most of the time you're going to be serving food and beverage, and it would be hard for people to be wearing masks in those events. And so you're talking, and, you know, certainly that could be a spreader. So I think that most people are not, I haven't heard of anybody planning to do that in this coming year.
Okay. Yeah, it seems difficult to network when you're
Yeah.
wearing a mask and having to stand 6 feet away from people. So,
Especially if you're serving any kind of food and beverage.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, certainly you could have it if it was just a, you know, a meet and greet kind of thing, but.
yeah. Okay.
And then we'll jump into some other, is there another question, Kate?
So Hugh, I know you're about to speak to the ASL interpreters. We actually have a question related to that. So they were asking about the need to accommodate that difference, and that they have a lot more ASL teachers coming to their conferences that need that interpretation, but the cost of providing interpreters had exceeded their revenue in the past. So they are wondering about the legal obligation for that.
Sure. On this issue of ASL interpreters, so a couple of things. You know, the genesis of this is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which essentially, and there may be some analogous requirements under state law, but it's mostly the ADA, which essentially says that if you have an event at a place of a public place, a hotel, a restaurant, as opposed to your private office, let's say. But if you have it at a public place, and that would probably include a public, may include a public university as well, then you have to, then accommodations have to be made to allow people who have disabilities to get the benefit of that event. So if someone's in a wheelchair, they've got to be able to access that event. There has to be some way for them to get in and move around. And most, in my experience, most ADA issues dealing with events are with people who are hearing impaired, and they want some accommodation. So when they go to the sessions, they can get the full benefit of the sessions. So a couple things to keep in mind. There is no absolute requirement that you provide an ASL interpreter, right? That's what people often request, and that may be what you ultimately do, but there is no mandate that you provide that. You can look at other options. And it is ultimately up to you as the organization, as the sponsor of the event, as to what accommodation you're going to provide. The disabled individual can make requests, but they can't dictate to you what it is you do, what kind of accommodation you provide. It's also not only acceptable, but it's anticipated by the ADA that organizations will have a conversation with their attendee, with the attendee who's requesting an accommodation, to try to work something out. Say, okay, well, we can't do this, but what about this? And what if we do these things? And so now sometimes I have found attendees are not necessarily willing to do that, but that is the expectation of the ADA, that there will be a conversation. So what might be an alternative to an interpreter? Sometimes people are not completely deaf, and they can read lips, so they may be able to sit up in the front row. Or you can provide, sometimes you can provide a note taker, a transcription, some sort of transcription service is another option. I think someday, I don't know if we're at that day, I think someday ASL interpreters will go the way of travel agents, because of the technology is going to be such. And I know that, they have the technology now. I don't know what it costs, where a speaker, as they're speaking, that it's real time being transcribed on your laptop or something as an attendee. So there may be things like that. You can record, speakers may be willing to provide a copy of their presentation, something like that. So you can try to negotiate, or you may say, look, we're not going to, this is a 2-day conference and we're not paying for 2 days of an ASL interpreter, but, if you will pay for a half day, so you pick where you want to go, or we'll pay for this half of this day and half of that day or something. There is an undue hardship exception, that you don't have to provide an accommodation if it presents an undue hardship. What we don't know is what is an undue hardship. So often an organization will say, if we have to hire an interpreter for this conference, this entire conference, there goes our profit. We're not going to make any money off this conference, or it's going to cut in half of our profit or something like that. Is that an undue hardship? I think it is, but others would say, and then, let's say another interpretation would say, look at ACTFL, right? And say, well, ACTFL, you might lose money on this event, but we're going to look at you as an entire organization, and you're, it's a drop in the bucket for you as you look at all of your sources of revenue and all of your costs. So there are different interpretations. There's been no definitive ruling on that, but I would definitely take advantage of that undue hardship. I would take the position that we're not going to hire an interpreter because we're not going to make money off this event. We do, but we will do what we can to accommodate you. Sometimes the speaker will be willing to meet with somebody afterwards and and if they can relapse or talk to them, or some accommodation. If everyone's acting in good faith, it can often be worked out. But the bottom line is, yeah, there's a general obligation, but it's there's a lot of discretion as to how you meet that obligation.
Hugh, the other thing too, with social media now, it's really difficult if you are not willing to just go to accommodate every need. And I mean, I think you understand what I'm talking about. It's very difficult now for you to we face that with ACTFL. It is extremely expensive. And we do try to accommodate everyone, and that has, that's deaf or hearing impaired. There are some new devices out now that I understand that can be rented and used. We're facing this now with our virtual platform, and that a lot of the things that are on demand and the simul-live sessions, how do you know who's going to what hearing impaired person is going to view what sessions? And we're struggling with that right now to try to figure that out, even though we ask people to tell us if they have a hearing impairment, what would you want to attend? However, it's not always that case. The other thing too that goes beyond the hearing impaired is recently we've had a lot of visually impaired attendees that we've had to accommodate. That's a little bit easier because we can do large print. A lot of the devices now will translate. So that's a little easier, but I think the one that really incurs more expenses for everybody are the hearing impaired or deaf attendants.
Yeah, and Julie, you raise a good point. I think you certainly can have in the registration material something that says if you need an accommodation, please let us know, 30 days,
right,
whatever, in advance. And then if they do let you know, then you can contact them and say, okay, what sessions do you plan to attend? And
right,
if they change their plans at the last second, then
we're not,
you're off the hook. I mean, you try to still accommodate, but if it's understandable if you can't.
Right. I hope that answers the question, Kate, that somebody had. So we'll move along here. I just wanted to talk a little bit about decreasing hotel room blocks. And one of the reasons that I put this in here is because actually I think everybody for the next couple of years needs to think about the fact that you're not going to have the numbers of people that you normally have at your event. And to be honest with you, I've already been approaching hotels in San Diego. I just read recently that everybody should think about reducing their hotel room blocks now by 50% or even less. Because you're just not going to have the numbers of people flying. They're still nervous about getting on a plane and flying long distances. So I think that in all honesty, and this goes back to contract, Hugh, certainly I'm covered for next year, but a lot of the hotels now are being very reasonable. They understand, I want your business, so I'm willing to reduce the block, but don't wait, because as Hugh said, they're less likely to work with you if you wait till, a month out. And the reason for that is hotels can resell those rooms. Either they can sell it to transient business, or maybe they get another group in-house to coincide with what your event. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, because that is certainly something everybody should be thinking about now, because if you don't, you will get into that attrition penalty phase, and it's good to be proactive. So I just wanted to throw that out. And then moving on to cancellation insurance. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but I can tell you that, of course, a lot of groups who ended up having to cancel this year, their insurance did not cover them. And the reason for that is because they didn't have in the insurance. Who knew that there was going to be a pandemic? When I do cancellation insurance for ACTFL, I make sure that we include several things. And one is that we include communicable diseases. Now, had we had insurance for this year, which we don't do until we do our budget, I would have put in communicable disease. The other thing is terrorism. We want to make sure that we have that, just because you never know what's going to happen. But the whole fact that some of the groups who did have meetings that were scheduled in February and March had cancellation insurance, and they had purchased that the insurance that included communicable diseases. So when they canceled and went to virtual, they were covered. So just in the future, I would suggest that any meeting that is significant in size, you definitely should have cancellation insurance. And of course, I'm happy to share with you, but most insurance brokers will be able to steer you in the way of meeting cancellation insurance, because I know that I get like 3 quotes from different companies. So they do that, that's their business. So I would suggest that you seriously consider that. And then the last point on here that I wanted to talk about was diversity, inclusion, and programming, which is something that ACTFL is really striving hard to do. And I think there's a slide there, Kate, of what we are looking at. And this has been run by everybody that I can think of. The government agencies, we've had this reviewed by several groups. And basically what we're doing is adding this to our membership, because our membership certainly goes into our programming software. And so that we are able to, you cannot select people based on this, but it's certainly a consideration. And it's just for your own benefit to look at when you're considering. We want to make sure that we have, some diversity in our programming, and especially with our presenters in our program. And this was several organizations have started doing this now. And of course, the organization that I'm a member of, my professional organization, recommended this. So these are some things that we're doing for the future to try to be more inclusive. And Hugh and I are also available if anybody wants to reach out after this to either of us. And Kate, I don't know if there's a slide here with Hugh's contact information on it, but we can certainly make that available. There it is. Yeah. Yep. So I'm sure that he would be happy to consult with you. And of course, I would be happy to share anything that I know about. So anyway, this has been great. Thank you.
We do have one question that came in. Do you include the diversity question on the proposal form?
No, we don't. Yep. That was on the, our membership, when people sign in to that all of that information transfers over, so we see it on the presenter side.
Any other last thoughts from our presenters?
Nope.
Nope, just thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for being here too. Thank you all for being here with us today, and we hope to connect with you all virtually at our convention in November.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.